Welcome back to Grudge Grace, where we explore the mysterious and unexplained. I'm your host, Angelina, and tonight I have a story that will make you question everything you think you know about the roads less traveled. Before we begin, I want you to find a comfortable place to sit, maybe dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. This account comes from Thaddeus Blackwood, a veteran truck driver whose encounter with the supernatural changed his life forever. Let me paint you a picture of our storyteller. Thaddeus is a man in his 50s now, weathered by decades of long-haul driving, with calloused hands that have gripped countless steering wheels through endless nights. When he first contacted our show, his voice carried a weight that only comes from witnessing something that defies explanation. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if each word carried the burden of a truth too strange to believe, yet too real to forget. The winter of 2016 was particularly harsh across the American Southwest. December had arrived with an unusual bite, bringing temperatures that made even seasoned desert dwellers reach for their heaviest coats. It was during this brutal cold snap that Thaddeus Blackwood found himself preparing for what should have been a routine haul from Phoenix, Arizona to Denver, Colorado. Thaddeus had been driving transport trucks for over 15 years by then, specializing in car carrier operations. His truck was a massive beast, a Peterbilt 379 pulling a 2-level car carrier trailer that could transport up to 10 vehicles at once. The rig stretched nearly 80 feet from bumper to bumper, and when fully loaded, it weighed close to 80 pounds. I'd made the Phoenix to Denver run probably 50 times over the years, Thaddeus told me, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of a man who'd spent countless hours breathing diesel fumes. It was supposed to be milk run load up the cars, take I-17 north to I-40, then straight shot east through New Mexico and into Colorado. Simple as that. The load that December night was typical. 7 luxury sedans destined for high-end dealerships in Denver, 2 SUVs for private customers, and 1 vehicle that would prove to be an omen, a white 2015 Mercedes sedan that had been in a collision. The car was still drivable but bore the scars of its accident: a crumpled front end, spiderwebbed windshield, and a door that wouldn't quite close properly. That damaged car gave me the creeps from the moment we loaded it, Thaddeus recalled. It was the last one to go on the trailer, and we had to use the lift to get it up there. The whole time, I kept thinking about whoever had been driving it during the accident. His partner for this run was Cornelius Grimm, a man in his early 60s who'd been driving these routes since before Thaddeus had even gotten his commercial license. Cornelius was old school, a leather-faced veteran who could tell you the grade of every hill between California and New York, who knew which truck stops had the best coffee and which ones to avoid after dark. Cornelius was the kind of driver who'd seen everything, Thaddeus said. Flash floods in Arizona, whiteout blizzards in Wyoming, dust storms that could strip paint off your truck. If he said something was worth worrying about, you listened. They completed their pre-trip inspection as the sun set over Phoenix on December 15th. The temperature was already dropping into the 30s, unusual for the desert, and weather reports predicted it would hit the low 20s before dawn. Both men bundled up in heavy jackets, knowing that if anything went wrong with the truck's heating system, they'd be in serious trouble. The truck's cab was their mobile home for the next few days. Behind the driver and passenger seats was a small sleeper compartment with a narrow bunk, storage compartments, and a small refrigerator. The dashboard was covered with the tools of their trade: GPS units, CB radio, logbooks, and a thermos of coffee that would have to last them through the night. At exactly midnight, they pulled out of the Phoenix shipping yard. The city lights created an orange glow in their rearview mirrors as they headed north on I-17, the weight of 10 vehicles making the truck work harder than usual on the uphill grades. The plan was to maintain a steady 40 miles per hour and reach the Colorado state line by the following evening. Everything was going smooth for the first couple hours, Thaddeus remembered. Traffic was light, weather was holding, and we were making good time. Cornelius dozed off in the passenger seat around 1:30, and I was just cruising along, listening to some late-night radio show. The desert landscape rolled by in the darkness, illuminated only by the truck's powerful headlights. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels in the distance, their arms raised against the star-filled sky. The temperature gauge showed the outside air had dropped to 28 degrees, making the truck's heater work overtime to keep the cab comfortable. It was at 2:47 a.m. that everything began to unravel. The CB radio crackled to life with an urgent message from their dispatcher. A massive pileup on I-40 east of Flagstaff had completely shut down the highway. 8 vehicles were involved, including 2 fatalities, and the road would be closed for at least 12 hours. Making matters worse, local protesters had set up roadblocks on several alternate routes, angry about a recent mining permit that had been approved despite community opposition. The dispatcher was pretty clear, Thaddeus said. Either we could park it and wait for the road to clear, or we could find another way around. But he warned us that some of the detour routes were dangerous, lots of truck hijackings in recent months. Cornelius jerked awake as the radio chatter filled the cab. He listened intently, his weathered face creased with concentration. When the dispatcher finished, Cornelius leaned forward and grabbed the CB handset. "This is Big Dog," he said, using his longtime handle. "We'll find a way around. Can't afford to lose a day sitting on the side of the road." The dispatcher acknowledged and wished them luck. As Cornelius hung up the handset, he turned to Thaddeus with determination. "Kid, I'm gonna take you on a route that most drivers don't even know exists," he said. "It's gonna add 8, maybe 10 hours to our trip, but it'll get us around all this mess. Just trust me on this one." Thaddeus nodded, though he felt a flutter of unease. In 15 years of driving, he'd learned that sometimes the long way around was indeed the shortest way home. But something about the way Cornelius spoke with a mixture of confidence and hesitation made him wonder if his partner was as certain as he sounded. 20 minutes later, they took exit 179 off I-17, following signs toward a small town called Cordes Junction. The exit ramp led them onto a 2-lane state highway that wound through increasingly remote terrain. What had been desert scrubland gradually gave way to rocky hills and sparse forests of juniper and pine. "This is beautiful country during the day," Cornelius said, settling back into his seat, "but it can be unforgiving at night. You keep your eyes on the road and let me navigate." The state highway was well maintained, but narrow, with no shoulder and guardrails that had seen better days. The truck's headlights swept across the landscape as they followed the winding route, illuminating glimpses of deep ravines and towering rock formations. Other than the occasional reflective road sign, there was no indication of human presence anywhere. After an hour on the state highway, Cornelius directed him onto an even smaller road, a county route that appeared on their GPS as a thin gray line. The pavement was rougher here, patched and repatched over the years, and the truck's suspension groaned under the weight of the loaded trailer. "This is where it gets interesting," Cornelius said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We're going to be off the beaten path for a while." The county road took them through terrain that seemed almost lunar in its desolation. Vast expanses of rocky desert stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional mesa or butte rising from the desert floor. The vegetation was sparse in twisted, ancient-looking trees that seemed to claw at the sky with gnarled branches. It was during this stretch that Thaddeus made his first mistake. Around 4:30 a.m., as they passed through a small settlement that consisted of nothing more than a gas station and a few mobile homes, he decided to stop for cigarettes. The craving had been building for hours, and the stress of the detour had his nerves on edge. "I'll just be a minute," he told Cornelius, who was dozing with his feet propped up on the dashboard. The gas station was a relic from another era, a single pump operation with a small convenience store attached. The elderly attendant looked surprised to see a car carrier at this hour, but he was friendly enough as he sold Thaddeus a pack of Marlboros and a cup of coffee. "You boys are pretty far off the main road," the attendant said. "Don't see many big rigs come through here." "Just taking a detour around the accident on I-40, Thaddeus replied. The old man nodded. "Well, you be careful out there. This time of night, in this cold, things can get strange in the desert." Thaddeus thanked him and walked back to the truck, lighting a cigarette as he went. The nicotine helped calm his nerves, but as he climbed back into the cab, he felt disoriented. The gas station sat at an intersection, and in the darkness, it was difficult to tell which way they'd been traveling. "Left or right," he muttered to himself, looking at the two roads that branched off from the station. Cornelius was snoring softly, his CB radio turned down low. Not wanting to wake his partner over something so simple, Thaddeus made an educated guess. The road to the right seemed to continue in the same general direction they'd been traveling, so he eased the truck onto it and began accelerating. It was a decision that would haunt him for years to come. For the next 90 minutes, Thaddeus drove through increasingly alien landscape. The road itself seemed to deteriorate with each mile, transitioning from patched asphalt to rough concrete to what felt like barely maintained gravel. The terrain grew more desolate, more hostile, with rock formations that looked like sleeping giants and valleys that disappeared into impenetrable darkness. "I should have woken Cornelius right away," Thaddeus said, his voice heavy with regret. "But I was stubborn, you know. I'd been driving for 15 years. I figured I could handle a simple detour." The truck's headlights carved a narrow cone of visibility through the darkness, beyond which lay an abyss of black that seemed to swallow light itself. No other vehicles appeared in either direction, not even the distant glow of taillights or the approaching sweep of headlights. It was as if they were the only souls moving through this wasteland. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the steady rumble of the diesel engine and the whisper of wind across the desert. Even the radio had fallen silent, picking up nothing but static from the scattered stations they'd been listening to earlier. It was then that Thaddeus saw something that made his blood run cold. A white shape darted across the road about 50 yards ahead, moving with impossible speed from right to left. It was there for only a fraction of a second, caught in the outer edge of the headlight beam, but it left an impression that burned itself into his memory. "It looked like a woman," he told me, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "But the way she moved, it wasn't natural. She was gliding, not running. And she was wearing what looked like a white dress or gown, but it was flowing like it was underwater." Thaddeus gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white with tension. He told himself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a piece of debris caught in the wind, or an animal that had appeared human-like in the brief moment he'd seen it. But deep down he knew he'd witnessed something that shouldn't have been there. The road continued to wind through the desolate landscape, and with each mile Thaddeus felt more isolated, more vulnerable. The truck's heater was working overtime against the cold, but he felt chilled to the bone. The GPS had lost its signal completely, showing only a gray screen with no reference points. Finally, around 6:00 a.m., he couldn't stand it anymore. He reached over and shook Cornelius awake. "Hey, partner, I think we might have a problem." Cornelius came awake instantly, the way experienced drivers do. He looked around, taking in the alien landscape visible through the windshield, then checked the GPS and swore under his breath. "Where the hell are we?" he demanded. "I think I took a wrong turn back at that gas station," Thaddeus admitted. "I wasn't sure which way we'd been going, and I didn't want to wake you." Cornelius was furious. "Do you have any idea how much fuel we've burned? How far off route we might be?" He grabbed the CB handset and tried to raise their dispatcher, but got nothing but static. Their cell phones showed no signal. "We're in the middle of nowhere," Cornelius said, his voice tight with anger and worry. "And we're hauling $250,000 worth of vehicles through God knows what kind of country." He pulled out the road atlas and tried to figure out where they were, but the road they were on didn't appear on any map. It was as if they'd driven off the edge of the known world. "Look," Cornelius said finally, "We've got two choices. We can try to backtrack and hope we can find our way to a main road, or we can keep going and hope this road leads somewhere civilized." Thaddeus looked at the fuel gauge. They'd burned through nearly a quarter of their diesel, and backtracking would use even more. "What do you think?" Cornelius stared out at the hostile landscape. "I've been driving these roads for 25 years, and I've never seen country like this. But we're committed now. Let's keep going for another hour or two. If we don't find civilization, we'll have to backtrack." They pressed on as the sun began to rise, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. But instead of making the landscape more welcoming, the daylight only revealed how truly desolate this place was. There were no power lines, no fence posts, no signs of human habitation anywhere. It was as if they'd driven into a parallel world where civilization had never existed. "The weirdest part," Thaddeus said, "was that we kept seeing things that didn't make sense. Rock formations that looked like buildings from a distance, but when we got closer, they were just rocks. Shadows that moved wrong, like they were independent of whatever was casting them." Around 8:00 a.m., they crested a hill and saw something that made them both sit up straight. In the distance, maybe 2 miles away, was a thin column of smoke rising into the morning sky. "That's gotta be a camp or a house," Cornelius said, relief evident in his voice. "Someone's got a fire going." But as they got closer, they realized the smoke wasn't coming from a campfire or a chimney. It was rising from what looked like a natural gas flare, a tall flame burning from a metal pipe stuck in the ground. "What the hell is that?" Thaddeus asked. "Could be a gas well," Cornelius said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe some kind of industrial operation." They drove past the flare, and the road began to wind through a series of low hills. The landscape became even more surreal rock formations that defied explanation, valleys that seemed to have no bottom, and everywhere the sense that they were being watched. It was then that they saw the light. Far ahead, maybe 3 or 4 miles, a faint glow flickered in the distance. It was warm and yellow like firelight, and it seemed to be coming from a structure of some kind. "That's gotta be a house," Cornelius said. "Maybe a ranch or a mining operation." But as they drove closer, the light seemed to recede, staying always just out of reach. It was like chasing the horizon. No matter how far they traveled, it remained the same distance away. "This is getting weird," Thaddeus said. "Really weird." Cornelius pulled out the baseball bat he kept behind the seat, a Louisville Slugger he'd carried for protection ever since a hijacking attempt in New Mexico 5 years earlier. "I don't like this," he said. "We're too far from help if something goes wrong." The road curved around a massive rock formation, and suddenly they found themselves in a valley surrounded by towering stone walls. The light they'd been following was visible now, maybe a quarter mile ahead, and it was definitely coming from a building. "Okay," Cornelius said. "Here's what we're gonna do. We'll park the truck and I'll walk over there to see what's what. If it's people, I'll ask for directions. If it's something else," he hefted the bat, "well, we'll deal with that when we come to it." They found a spot behind a cluster of boulders where the truck would be hidden from the road. Thaddeus maneuvered the big rig into position and shut off the engine. The silence that followed was complete. No wind, no insects, no birds. Just an oppressive quiet that seemed to press against their eardrums. "You stay with the truck," Cornelius said. "Keep the doors locked and the curtains drawn. If I'm not back in an hour, try to get this thing turned around and head back the way we came." Thaddeus nodded, though the idea of being alone with a truck full of cars in this desolate place terrified him. He watched as Cornelius walked away, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness beyond the truck's headlights. And then he was alone. The truck's cab was equipped with curtains-heavy fabric panels that could be drawn across the windows to block out sunlight during mandated rest periods. Thaddeus pulled them closed now, creating a small cocoon of privacy in the vast emptiness. He turned off the truck's exterior lights, leaving only the dim glow of the dashboard instruments. The silence was absolute. In all his years of driving, he'd never experienced quiet like this. It was as if the world had stopped breathing, as if he existed in a vacuum where sound couldn't travel. He tried to distract himself by checking the load securement, making sure the chains and straps holding the cars were still tight. Everything seemed normal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. It was then that the car alarms started. The first one was subtle, a brief chirp from one of the sedans on the upper deck. Then another, longer this time. Within seconds, all 10 vehicles were wailing in a cacophony of electronic alerts that shattered the desert silence. "Jesus Christ," Thaddeus muttered, fumbling for his keys. The sound was deafening, echoing off the rock walls of the valley and carrying for miles in every direction. If anything lived in this place, it now knew exactly where they were. Thaddeus jumped out of the cab and ran to the back of the trailer, using his master key to silence the alarms one by one. But the damage was done. The noise had announced their presence to whatever called this place home. As he climbed back into the cab, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Footsteps. Someone or something was walking around the truck. The steps were deliberate, methodical, as if whatever was out there was conducting an inspection. Thaddeus sat perfectly still, barely breathing, as the footsteps circled the entire rig. Through the curtains, he could see the faint outline of a figure moving past the passenger side window. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it moved with a gliding motion that didn't match the sound of its footsteps. Then came the voices. At first, they sounded almost human, a low conversation in a language he didn't recognize. But as he listened more closely, he realized the voices had a quality that no human throat could produce. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carrying harmonics that made his teeth ache. More footsteps joined the first, and now he could hear what sounded like children, high-pitched voices, giggling and calling out in that same alien tongue. The truck began to rock gently, as if small hands were pushing against it. "Dear God," Thaddeus whispered, "what is this place?" The activity outside continued for what felt like hours. The voices came and went, sometimes near, sometimes distant. The truck continued to rock, and occasionally he heard sounds that defied description, scraping noises, as if something were being dragged across the pavement, and a low humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Through it all, Thaddeus sat frozen in the driver's seat, praying to every deity he could think of. He recited the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalm, and half-remembered verses from his childhood Sunday school. The religious words seemed to provide some comfort, or at least the illusion of protection. Then, cutting through the chaos, came a voice that was unmistakably female. It was powerful, commanding, and it spoke in the same strange language as the others. But where their voices had been merely unsettling, hers was terrifying in its authority. The other voices fell silent immediately. The footsteps stopped. Even the humming from the earth ceased. The woman's voice continued, and though Thaddeus couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear. She was calling them away, gathering them to her, like a mother summoning her children home for dinner. Gradually, the sounds faded. The footsteps moved away from the truck, heading in the direction of the mysterious light. The voices grew distant, then disappeared entirely. Thaddeus was alone again, but now the silence felt different. Less oppressive, more natural. He carefully pulled aside one of the curtains and peered out into the darkness. Nothing moved. No sounds carried on the still air. He had no idea how long he waited. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to have no meaning in this place. But eventually, he heard the most welcome sound in the world, human footsteps approaching the truck. "Thaddeus, you okay in there?" It was Cornelius, and he sounded shaken. Thaddeus unlocked the door and let his partner back into the cab. Cornelius was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he settled into the passenger seat. "What did you find?" Thaddeus asked. Cornelius was quiet for a long moment, staring out through the windshield. "There's a building up there," he said finally. "Looks like a house, maybe a ranch, but it's wrong." "Wrong how?" "The lights are on, there's smoke coming from the chimney. I could see a television flickering through one of the windows, but there's nobody there." Thaddeus felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, nobody there?" "I mean, the place is empty. I knocked on the door, called out, even walked around the building, but there's no one home. The door was unlocked, so I went inside." Cornelius shuddered. There was food on the table, still warm. Coffee in the pot, a fire burning in the fireplace. Someone had been there recently, but they were gone when I arrived. "Maybe they saw you coming and hid?" "I thought of that. I called out, told them I was a truck driver who was lost and needed help, but I searched the whole place. It's not that big, maybe 3 rooms. There was nowhere to hide." Thaddeus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. "So what do we do now?" "We get the hell out of here," Cornelius said. "I don't care how much fuel it costs or how much trouble we get in with the company. This place isn't right." They spent the next few minutes getting the truck turned around, a difficult maneuver in the confined space between the boulders. But finally, they were heading back the way they'd come, leaving the mysterious light behind them. The journey back was a nightmare of paranoia and fear. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every rock formation looked like a crouching figure. And always, there was the feeling that they were being followed, watched, hunted. "I kept checking the mirrors," Thaddeus said, "but I never saw anything behind us, just darkness. But I could feel them out there, keeping pace with us." It took them nearly 4 hours to retrace their route to the gas station where Thaddeus had made his fateful wrong turn. The elderly attendant was gone, replaced by a younger man who looked at them with suspicion. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Something like that," Cornelius replied. "That road we took, the one that heads east from here, where does it go?" The attendant's expression grew serious. "You went out on the Phantom Valley Road? At night?" He shook his head. "Locals call it that because of all the strange things that happen out there. Most folks won't drive it even during the day." "What kind of strange things?" Thaddeus asked. "Oh, the usual desert stories. Lights that follow you, voices in the wind, people who disappear. The Navajo say it's a place where the boundaries are thin, where our world touches something else." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's an old ranch house out there that's been empty for 30 years. But people still see lights in the windows, smoke from the chimney. Some say it's the ghosts of the family that used to live there. Others think it's something else entirely." "What happened to the family?" Cornelius asked. The attendant shrugged. "Depends on who you ask. Some say they just up and moved away one day. Others say they disappeared during a winter storm and were never found. But the house? The house keeps right on acting like they're still there." Thaddeus and Cornelius exchanged glances. They bought fuel, coffee, and sandwiches, then got back on the road. This time, they stuck to the main highways, adding an extra day to their journey, but arriving in Denver without further incident. "I never talked about it for years," Thaddeus told me. "Who would believe a story like that? But it changed me. I became more careful about the routes I took, more respectful of the places I traveled through." He paused, staring out the window of the diner where we'd met for this interview. "I retired from long-haul driving about 3 years ago. Bought a small place in Montana, started a little trucking company that only does local deliveries. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that place." "Do you think what you experienced was supernatural?" I asked. Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. "I think there are places in this world that we don't understand," he said finally. "Places where the rules we live by don't apply. Maybe they're haunted, maybe there's something else entirely. But they're real, and they're dangerous." He finished his coffee and stood to leave. "I've got one piece of advice for your listeners," he said. "If you're ever driving through the desert at night and you see a road that doesn't belong on any map, don't take it. No matter how lost you are, no matter how much time it might save you, some shortcuts aren't worth taking. As he walked away, I was left with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain, Thaddeus Blackwood had experienced something in that desert valley that had fundamentally changed his understanding of the world we live in. Whether it was supernatural, psychological, or something else entirely, the Phantom Valley had claimed 2 more witnesses to its mysteries. And somewhere in the Arizona desert, a lonely road still winds through impossible terrain, leading to a place that shouldn't exist. A place where the lights still burn in empty windows, and the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Whether you believe in supernatural forces, interdimensional phenomena, or simply the power of isolation and fear to play tricks on the human mind, one thing is certain: there are roads in this country that are best avoided after dark. Roads that lead to places that exist on no map, where time moves differently, and the very air seems charged with malevolent energy. As for the Phantom Valley itself, it remains out there somewhere in the Arizona desert, waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers to take a wrong turn in the darkness. The old ranch house still stands, its windows glowing with impossible light, its chimney sending smoke signals into the star-filled sky. And if you ever find yourself driving through the desert at night, if you see a road that doesn't appear on your GPS, if you glimpse lights in the distance that seem to beckon you forward, remember Thaddeus Blackwood's story. Remember that some detours lead to places from which not everyone returns. I'm Angelina, and I'll be back next week with another tale from the edge of reality. Until then, stay safe out there, keep your eyes on the road, and remember, sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. If you have a story to share, you can reach us at grudgeandgrace@podcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It helps other listeners find our show. Thanks for listening to Grudge Grace. Sleep well, if you can.